is the I'm Planet Podcast, episode 50. 50! Can you believe it? 50 episodes on this never-ending journey to figure out how to teach better. Today on the podcast, we're doing something a little bit special. I know, yes, we're in the midst of the book clubs and a bonus series where we have 4 episodes where we're highlighting some book clubs from the Teaching Math Teaching podcast. We're going to continue that in the next 2 episodes. We got 2 more to go that we're going to highlight. But for this episode, I wanted to do something special. It's the 50th episode. You got to do something special. And it became clear about what that something special needed to be when on July 25th, it became known that Bob Moses had passed away. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without the work of Bob Moses. And I know a lot of people would say those same words. Bob Moses was a civil rights activist in the 60s, in the Freedom Summer, registering people to vote here in Mississippi. And then he saw that same work of registering people to vote for people to access citizenship, access society through that action. He saw those same things happening in the math classroom. Yeah, he connected this registering people to vote for accessing the academic and economic opportunities available in the 60s to teaching algebra later on in his life. And he wrote a fantastic book with his co-author, Charles E. Cobb Jr., called Radical Equations, Civil Rights from Mississippi to the Algebra Project. I've wanted to talk about this book for a very long time, but it's like one of those that's on the shelf, and you're like, gosh, I want to make sure to do it right. And then when it became known that he had passed, I reached out to a friend, Dr. Aris Winger from Georgia Gwinnett College. Had Aris, many conversations with Aris before, and we've talked on another podcast, the Teaching Math Teaching podcast, which is a fantastic episode. I'll put links to it in the show notes. But I thought, he and I, we have great conversation together. He and I both hold Bob Moses in such high regard, and I thought he would be a great guest to have this conversation. And yes, he delivered. And so I don't want to spend too much time chatting ahead, but just know that this book is amazing. It really is the connection between the importance of teaching mathematics and how we can shape this society for the better. And Bob Moses, through his quiet dignity, did that on a daily basis. He made the decision to do that work, and he details that work in the book, and we get a chance to share and talk about that work in this podcast. And so if you are not familiar with Bob Moses, this episode will help you become a little bit familiar, but I would highly encourage you to pick up the book. If you are a teacher of mathematics, especially in Mississippi, but anywhere in the U.S., I would suggest picking up this book. And I mean, I have my students read a chapter out of it because it just lays down the importance of what we're doing every single day when we get up and start teaching math. And what does it mean to build that and facilitate that relationship? And so I got that from this book. Hopefully you get that from this book. And as always, we won't be able to cover everything in the book. And if you like what you hear, go get the book for yourself. Seriously, it's an older book, so you should be able to get it used somewhere, but it's definitely worth it to pick it up. So again, that's Radical Equations, Civil Rights from Mississippi to the Algebra Project by Robert Moses and Charles E. Cobb Jr. And then again, I'm joined on this episode by Dr. Aris Winger from Georgia Gwinnett College. He is also the co-host of a podcast called Mathematically Uncensored, which you can get on any podcast platform. But it's him and Dr. Pamela E. Harris, and they go deep into talking about some of the same issues that we're going to be talking about in this episode. And so they've got, they're 20 episodes deep, so they're 2/5 of the way to 50 episodes. So they're rocking them out. So go ahead and check out what their work there and the other work that's going to be at the Center for Minorities in the Mathematical Sciences. We'll put links to the website in the show notes, so you can be able to access that. But Anyway, without further delay, here's my conversation with Dr. Aris Winger on Bob Moses, the life and legacy of Bob Moses, and his book, Radical Equations, Civil Rights from Mississippi to the Algebra Project. Dr. Aris Winger, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of the Amidon Planet podcast. How are you?
Oh, good. I'm honored. That's what I am. No, I'm just so thankful to be here with you and spend time with you. You and I don't talk enough. I already know that. Yeah. So, I mean, you're one of the love warriors out there that, that I'm hoping to connect with a lot more. So, because it just helps change the narrative about our discipline.
Yeah. I mean, so I think we started talking, I had some unsuccessful NSF career grant applications, but that led to a couple conversations with you. I mean, and one of those conversations where I couldn't help but stand up and walk around. It was kind of like this.
I was already on a treadmill when you called me. I was in the gym in Pittsburgh, and it was around this time of the year because I'm in Pittsburgh in the summer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's right. And I remember Eden Badisher or someone at EDC was just like, you need to talk to Joel. Yeah. So.
And it was, it's one of those man, I gotta talk to Aris more. And then we had a chance to talk on the Math Teaching podcast. And that was, you know what? And I think back, that was, the conversation that we had and it was difficult time in the midst of pandemic. And there's caring for our students, there's constraints of an organization or government,
and
self-care, all this sort of stuff. And it's it was almost like a shot of adrenaline to the system. And it's there's people out there that are, hearing that are saying some messages, saying some things that teachers need to hear in order to get us through. Cause it was a slog at a time. And so appreciate you and all that you do.
No.
And we're going to tease it. So at the end, we're going to talk about all that you do, because there's some other things that's happening that are kind of exciting that I want to get to at the end of the podcast. And now, I'll preview it now. We're talking about another podcast. We're talking about Mathematically Uncensored. And so with you and Dr. Pamela E. Harris. And so I want to talk about that and see what's going on there. But we came here to talk about a book that means a lot to me and to you. It's Radical Equations, Civil Rights from Mississippi to the Algebra Project by Robert Moses, who and Charles E. Cobb Jr. He was a co-author. But we just we lost Bob Moses. He was, I think it was July 25th. And it was one of those things where I never get a paper. I don't have a paper that comes, but for some reason the paper, I don't know, they had some free ones, and then they threw one on our driveway, and I opened it up and I was there it was right there. It was Bob Moses of the Freedom Summer passed away. And it was just oh my gosh. So,
wow. Yeah.
I don't know. How did you hear the news? I mean, it's just, I know it was crushing to me.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember. I think I saw it on CNN. That's what it was. Yeah. I saw it on CNN. And then I have the honor of knowing his daughter. And so then I wrote her immediately. Maisha Moses is just, unbelievable there. So she and I had done some work together on a number of different projects. And then I've had the honor of meeting him, once or twice on the side in the middle of a conference while he was surrounded by so many other people, right? Just trying to get my hand in there.
The crowd that goes in.
That's right.
Oh, absolutely.
That's right. Yeah. And so, and I sat for a while after reading that and, and reflected on him and, when a quote legend passes away like this, it's a reminder to me of, who am I trying to be as a person? Yeah. Right. Because for me, it's always a paradox, because when I think about him, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Ella Baker, all these people, Ella Baker's mentioned in this book, right? I just think of, it's a paradox because I hold these people in such high esteem, but the last thing they will want me to do is to hold them in high esteem, because they would also want me to realize the power I have within myself to do very much the same things that they have been doing. Right. And so really just lauding them, but also saying, wait, there is more for me to do.
Right. And that, it seemed like that was it was organizing people to do the work. And I mean,
yes,
probably a motivation for writing the book is to, again, put that message out there. And so, so I was trying to, so we sent some questions back and forth. And so one of them was like, who is Bob Moses, for those that are unfamiliar? And I was trying to come up with some descriptors. So civil rights leader, community organizer, and math ed activist, but all in one.
Oh, yes. And that is, that's what I keep coming back to, because I mean, in the beginning of the book, it just says that, something to the effect of algebra and civil rights, ? Right. And for me, that says so much about, when I think about him, I think of a freedom warrior. Right. So, I tend to go beyond just the titles that we want to put. This is somebody who, who cares about, the rights and the lives of people. And in this book, for the first time, and I remember so long ago picking it up. First of all, let me just be clear, picking it up and seeing his face.
Yeah.
So for me as a Black man, to just pick up a book and see a Black man's face. Mm-hmm. And then to have, on the copy that I have, to have dedication, or the wording for it is escaping me, but the stamp of approval from Cornel West, right on the front, right, who was another hero of mine. I mean, but to then somehow combine, algebra and civil rights, to bring those together was just, for the first time for me, changed my life forever. Right. Mm-hmm. And then, in a lot of ways, he's just saying that mathematics is tied to the human experience in ways that we have yet to really think about. And so Radical Equations is like completely the correct title for the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll share that quote because I have probably the same book that you have. So from Cornel West, Robert Moses is a towering activist or intellectual of his generation, a grassroots freedom fighter of quiet dignity and incredible determination. And I mean, and that is represented in some of the stories that you get in this book of like, he's registering people to vote, and the intimidation that's over his shoulder, and like, does not falter, and then like is pulled into jail and like immediately makes the collect call to his connection to the Civil Rights Bureau, and like I mean, just the guts, and again, the quiet dignity that seems like a theme throughout.
Yeah, and it makes me think of that the only way, and I'm going to try and keep it together, and I won't be able to this whole time, but it makes me think of that this is not a hobby for him. Mm-hmm. No. Right. And so part of the courage that is tied to him and others is that it's a way of life for him. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about him later on in his life, that the part of the reason why he didn't stop is because this unrelenting part of it is because it's just who he is. Like, I mean, we all have a decision at some point to decide who we are going to be. Mm-hmm. And once we do that, then it becomes a lot easier to just fight the fight, because then it's not something that you do during the week and take off on the weekends, right? Yeah. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, just saying, I'm going to wake up every morning and this is what I'm trying to do, right? That it was his mission. It was his mission. And that's the challenge for all of us, right? And particularly doing work of equity and fighting for other people, that it's not a part-time job. It's just not a part-time job. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we mentioned too, like, I mean, just his position in Mississippi as like on the Mount Rushmore of civil rights leaders. And think like just the day before he passed is kind of incredible. Down at Jackson State, there's a mural that was unveiled for Chain Breakers. It was titled Chain Breakers. And he's right there, right in smack dab in the middle, and came again right before the day before his death. And so, and I'll post a link to the New York Times obituary, and there's a picture of it there in the show notes for this episode. Because
I've got to read that. Yeah,
it's a good one. I mean,
they're usually amazing.
It captures. I mean, it captures all. I mean, some of the stories of the violence that he saw when he was trying to register people to vote in Mississippi. I mean,
yes.
It's captured in the book, but then, you know, they touch on it there, but then also it's like how he saw this connection between the civil rights work in the 60s to like teaching algebra, and like
profound.
And that kind of transitions to the book. I mean, that's the book. The book is making that connection. So what I mean, and I didn't want to cruise through it. Like, so what, is there anything else like that you want to mention? Like, what does Bob Moses mean to you, Aris?
Oh my God. I mean, so he's a testament to what I'm trying to be, right? Just plain and simple, right? I mean, so, you know, I'm navigating this world, you know, trying to, again, speak the truth and say what needs to be said, because I know that it's tied to the suffering of people. And, you know, I got my core people who I just continue to think about, like, what would these people do? And he's one of them, right? That where you just say, you know, and I always do this, always try and think of the people who came before me as fuel to continue to just say what needs to be said, do what needs to be done, and not to be complacent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was like my first engagement as like a scholar. I don't know who did, but they slid this book across to me and they said, you need to read this. And like,
oh, you don't even remember who it was?
I can't even. I want to say it was Dr. Vicki Hand at the University of Colorado Boulder. I want to say it was her, but I'm not for sure. But I mean, but it was like, it was so early on that it was like, and then I read it, and then also as my first it was my first NCTM conference, like that I was going to present at, and it was in Kansas City, and he was there, and I was getting a coffee, and I'm like, that guy kind of looks like Bob Moses in front. And then I just kind of followed him, and he went straight into the biggest room that they had, and like went up to the front and like gave his talk. And I'm just like, it was Bob. And like just sitting there absorbing. But like, again, the you know, sharing that story, right? Like it's as deep in him as possible. Like this is a call for civil rights, like what you're doing as a teacher of mathematics, or then transitioning to a teachers of teachers. Like, this is important work. And this is more than just teaching about symbols and representation. This is about way more than that. And like, that was that, you know, like it's about math, about humanity, about, you know, it's about teaching of people, not just teaching a subject. Right. Correct.
No. And we've been saying this on the podcast a lot, that people first. Mm-hmm. And ironically or paradoxically, when you talk about mathematical experiences, right, we tend to focus on the mathematical part and not on the experiences part. That we have to be focusing on the people we're talking to, and then that will improve the mathematics and the mathematical experiences.
Yeah, and like this, and like, you know, I guess sometimes we say things so much, and maybe in this world, that we like the whole, you know, seeing math as like a window and a mirror, seeing yourself in it, but also experiencing the world. And like, to put that first, right? And not just like, you know, is there an exponential curve behind there or something like no. Like, let's talk about experience first.
Yes.
Can I humble brag a little bit?
Please.
So my son completely like on his own signed up for a organization in Mississippi. And I think Bob Moses would be proud of this, because it was young people, young college kids in like 2018 that started this Mississippi Votes thing to register young people to vote. They see the demographics. And so they started to organize and put on, you know, voter registration drives and things like that. And so my son, somewhere during the pandemic, saw this opportunity for a fellowship, and now is a fellow with Mississippi Votes and is starting to register people to vote. And so it's like, you know, and he's very strong mathematically, but I just was one of those things where it's like, this is, I mean, you think about the stories of registering people to vote in the book, and thinking about now it's a very different situation, but it means still there's power there, right? There's a power in participating. So
and you look, and this reminds me too, that you never know the influence of a parent, and you know what he saw in you and in order to just, and how that gets transferred to him. It's powerful.
It was. I'm excited for him. So I'm see what they're doing. And
the challenges that he will face. That's the education for sure. Yeah.
And I mean, then the organization. I'm just excited to learn more about it and like what they're trying to accomplish. And again, all young people that's getting it done. So it's pretty cool. So let's dive into the book. So what, and we kind of touched on it already. Like how would you describe what radical equation is to somebody that had never experienced it?
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it's this notion of connecting, mathematics to the humanity of people in a lot of ways, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we have, and for me, it's also, it's like a decision. It's like, and it's a breakthrough, right? I mean, you have somebody who is I'm still trying to wrap my head around it at the time. Like, how is it that somebody who is, fighting the fight in the civil rights movement then somehow comes to algebra and really makes the connection that today it's like, oh, we're all still fighting to make this connection in a lot of ways. But, he sees it, right, and says, you know what, these things are tied together. And so for me, it's a breakthrough. It's a breakthrough of that we're still trying to wrap our heads around. So in a lot of ways, it's far ahead of its time still, right? Where it would be my hope that just like you ran across it, every teacher, this is a required reading for every teacher, right, of mathematics, right? And so, it's a breakthrough in understanding that our walk in this world as citizens, as humans, is tied to mathematics in ways that, that right now is not being taught in our schools.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the key term that I keep going back to is this, that, so algebra, once solely in place as the gatekeeper for higher math, and the priesthood who gained access to it now is the gatekeeper for citizenship. And I think right there, in thinking about, well, some of our graduates are now going in to teach that Algebra 1 class, and they say, well, I'm just teaching Algebra 1, I want to do it. Like, no, this is important. This is important work here. This is, I mean, there's a gate that's been set up, and like, he was saying, like, we need to get as many people through that gate as possible, and so that we can tear down that gate.
That's right. That's right. No, and I think we should stay there, and I think that phrase, that quote, should be screamed out to the world forevermore, right? We should blare that quote out. Because I think I like the quote, and I think it's also an indictment of our system, right? Yeah. That based in it is this accepting of algebra as a gatekeeper, and we have to call that into question, right? Too, right? Yeah. No, I love that quote.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw it again when I was trying to think about, well, what is this book? It's a book that describes the connections between civil rights and voting rights and math literacy, and the work done. I mean, and that's the thing. Like he did work. I mean, like the work to do that. Like, hey, voting is important, and so what is the work that he did? And like, there's so many stories captured in here about the organization and empowering people to do that work as well. And also, I just want side note, like. He's also in the book by Miles Horton, or not Miles. Yeah, well, Miles Horton tells some of the stories, but about the Highlander Folk School, but talking about creating some of those, the workshops and some of the work that was done through Highlander of figuring out how to help communities. And you see it in the work that he did of organizing and helping others do the work as well. But then,
and that gets me thinking again, that again, it's for me, it's another paradox that, he was in the trenches. He was working with people all the time. Right. And we only in some sense get to know about him after he does this his whole life. Right. And so it's not like he's trying to do this for publicity or anything. I mean, he is in the trenches with people. And so this is a call out to all of us that, who are the 3 or 4 people who we are organizing or being in the trenches with? Or are we always just at the quote high level, just, trying to talk in committee meetings and just, at the high level? Who are the people that we're helping that are deep down in the trenches, right?
Right. Yeah. If all my work happens in this little closet, not
yes.
like that's not a good, a good sign.
And that also means in this office, that also means,
right.
In the 5th floor, in the committee room, if that's all that you're doing, it's not going to work.
Yeah. So I asked you to, because we could go on and on. And again, this is a great book. It's available. Go get it for those of you out here that are listening. But thinking about some of the learnings that you had, and I know I was going through this. I got up at 4 because I'm like, man, how do I narrow this down? And just going through everything, but trying to think like, well, what are some key learnings that we can nail down from this text? Moses has shared.
For me, it's about in a lot of ways, it just like all the other legends, it is tied to overcoming a fear, right? And that, there's no doubt that he's human. He was afraid, and yet look at all of what he did, and that I feel like there's a sense of paralysis over some of us who want to go to a certain level, and then they back away, right? And so when I get the fear, I think of people like Bob Moses and say, he did it, so can I. I can do 20% of what he did. Mm-hmm. I know that, and that's going to be a lot, right? And so for me, in his work, I'm just thinking about these critical moments, and I'm thinking about the conflicts that he had, right? That he had to continuously go up against and fight. And there was no doubt that he was ready to do that. And so I today am looking around at a bunch of cowards in our discipline, in our country, people who, and I mean that lovingly, right? And I'm not beating around the bush about it, because for me to be a coward, and I've been a coward many times in my life, is when we know what the truth is, we have the opportunity to speak the truth out, and we choose to do something else, right? And so there are too many of us who are looking around and seeing things that aren't right, and we are saying nothing, and we're moving on for the rest of our day. And so in the spirit of him and many others like him, it's like, no, you know what? I'm staying here, and I'm going to fight the good fight. And so, when I read these stories, it's just, I have to keep remembering that he makes a choice. He makes a choice. He gets up every day, makes the choice to fight for people who are marginalized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, it's almost could be titled Radical Courage. Just because over and over again, stepping up, and like, just the both the stories of like how these initial efforts begin, and then he hits something, and keeps going from here. Or if it's the math, he hits something and keeps going. We'll figure it out. We're gonna move ahead with it. And it's just every single time that courage to keep stepping forward.
And it becomes a habit. It does become a habit. Once I started to open my mouth a little bit, right, particularly on the show, on Mathematically Uncensored, and I started saying stuff, and I'm like, wow, I just said that. And that feels great. Right? To have said that has needed to be said, right? And so, I think like everything else, you just get used to it, and you just say, you know what, it's okay, and I'm going to keep trying to do this. It doesn't come without consequences, right? But you start to realize that that it's worth it for your own soul as well. I come back to a piece by Audre Lorde. I mentioned this on the other podcast you and I were doing about the transformation of silence into action. And she says, what are we going to do with our silences? They're not helping you now. You think they're helping you, but at the end of it, what are they going to do for you? And nothing. Yeah. Right.
That's one thing he was not. The thing is, he's quiet, but not silent. Right.
Correct.
And like that over and over again, you see that as evidence.
Yes.
And I saw the whole idea that in chapter 1 was something that is over and over again. I come back to it. It's a assigned reading for my classes. And just to, that importance of that whole idea of it, like this being a gatekeeper to citizenship. I don't ever it's almost highlight that over and over again. Cause especially I'm teaching, elementary math methods. and thinking about the relationships that they're trying to facilitate with mathematics. One, they have to think about their own relationship first too, and think about what, maybe even they might have been limited in opportunities from their relationship with mathematics. And now they have an opportunity. They're stewards or caretaker or like facilitators of someone else's relationship. And how do they present themselves? How do they, who do they see as doers of mathematics? And how are they making sure that, they're not closing gates to these kids in whatever grades they're at. And you see with the, the stories of students' relationship of their history with mathematics, we call it math history, and thinking about what were the influences and how powerful a teacher is in those cases. So like how powerful the teacher is that's standing right at that gate. Right. And so like, and so like the transition from when I was teaching, algebra level in my high school teaching days to now thinking about teaching teachers and over and over again, thinking about that phrase and how important this work is.
No, what are we saying? We're saying that these teachers are freedom fighters themselves. And so I've been working a lot recently on narratives and narrative change. You change cultures by changing the narratives that we accept without interrogation. And so what happens if you, myself, and a bunch of other people reframe and start to scream out that teachers are freedom fighters, right? So then what is of course, we know the pushback against that, because when you start mentioning freedom and justice, all of a sudden people start saying, why are you bringing politics? It's right. Yeah. And so be it. If that's the fight, then that's the fight, right? But the way that we get around that is you say that they're precious young people whose citizenship is on the line here, right? And we go deeper than that sometimes. We have to say that if we don't fight for, the liberation of people according to what this book is saying, then young people are going to suffer. Right. Yeah. Right. And then we have to just lay it out plain, because, it's to Bob Moses's point, Martin Luther King Jr.'s point, that, these are people who should put a light on the conditions of people who are not living their best lives. And so I'm thankful to you and others who, try and set the stakes as big as they are, that this is the first part of a long journey to citizenship and full rights in our society.
Well, even to use the term that you put before, the love warrior, and thinking about like, hey, you love your students. Well, okay. So here's how you can express love as being a darn good teacher of mathematics. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. You just changed my life. That's right. Because there we go. Right. Because we hear that all the time. And here's, this is what we're talking about in terms of narrative. When you say, do you love your kids? We have to say what that looks like. And oh my goodness. Right. So, you and I are centered around love, but love is also one of the most overused words in our society. And when this gets overused, then it doesn't get the weight that it deserves, right? And so then what does it look like then? First of all, Tavis Smiley, who's been disgraced recently, has a quote that I absolutely love. And it's just like, where's the love gone? Right. Where's love in the public discourse? Right. And that might be tied to a lot of the problems we're having. But we often hear our teachers say, I love my kids. I love my kids. And what does it look like to spend 15 minutes to say, what does that mean? Right. To go to the board and just write down what that means. And you know what's going to be missing? Everything that's in this book. Right. There we are. There we are. And so we have an opportunity to say, okay, everything that you just wrote is fantastic. Let me write some things too. Right. Right. And this book says that love is tied to fighting for these things, fighting for your kids in these ways. Right. And, and that we demand that you add a definition of love to your practice. And when you do that, then you'll teach differently than anybody's ever taught. Well, and that's the thing. Like he's talked about like the brilliance of kids being hidden through basically like translation, right? That there's like, we're talking in this language and yet, how do we be explicit with the connections in language and how people experience the world, how people talk about the world. And then how do you represent that mathematically? And he's like, lays it out super explicitly. Absolutely. And like, how do there's brilliance here. And like, how do we, how do we provide avenues in order for it to be demonstrated to not only to the classroom, but to the world, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And that each teacher individually, while looking that child in the eye, always has the opportunity to reveal and uplift that brilliance in ways that might have to counteract the narratives of their school and the school district and all these other systems, right? So I always come back to the power of a teacher to go ahead and say, regardless of the grade, regardless of what the test score says, that I honor the brilliance you have. I believe in your brilliance, your potential, and all of it.
Yeah. Like doing a little rereading of the Dream Keepers. And I think it's Ms. Devereaux, I think is the math teacher. I can't remember exactly, but I believe that's it. But like the contrast between Mrs. Devereaux and then there's a student teacher in the book. It's like almost side by side.
Yeah.
And it's like the math classroom, Ms. Devereaux, and who's, part of the group of teachers that coined culture relevant pedagogy. And like it's almost like a 3-ring circus. There's so much activity going on. There's math everywhere. There's kids holding responsibilities for things in the class that are going on, whether they're counting or other things that are a part of the mathematics, but also part of the classroom responsibility. And like, there's all this going on of like, and then you see the contrast with the student teacher, similar group of kids, where it's like, he's only looking at one way. Like, it's almost like one plane that like, I'm just looking at this little slice of everything and I'm not seeing what I want to see and getting frustrated, versus like Devereaux's opened up all these different opportunities to explore and see and observe the brilliance and then offer some fuel in order to keep it going in a certain direction. So
what's a reimagination of what mathematics can be?
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And again, that's a space in which, they're putting people first. Yeah. Like it's not rocket science. It's just, I don't think it's rocket science, right? And I think I keep coming back to this, but we're making choices.
Right.
We just have to decide. And I think that, and this is the other narrative. I think that people are just accepting too much that this is just the way it has to be.
Right.
Right. And that we have to keep saying it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way.
Right. I mean, and like you said, like, the simple things of, well, we know if we detract, that's a good thing. But then too often, like the people are too scared about like, well, what's the ramifications if we do that? Well, and it's, it's one of those things. It's one of those things to step forward with.
Well, and I can't let you get away with that. Yeah, that means that, I mean, we're not going to trail off on that. So when we talk about detracting, then we're talking about some people who benefit from tracking. Right. So, I mean, so we got to protect our smart ones, and we got to protect, we got to put the brilliant people, the people who we think are gifted in certain places, and we've got to put these other people in other places. We can't mix them and all this other stuff, right? So there are people who are afraid, there are people who are benefit, and none of these people are on my side. And it's just that simple. So what I have to do somehow, right, is in the spirit of Bob Moses and is the spirit of King and all these other people, is how is it that we can still center love and also understand that love is not, that means that I'm not going to fight back against you. Right. Because, I mean, so the hope is that we can come to some agreement, because the big thing is that everybody's going to benefit. Right. On the other side, it is not either or, it's and. I know. Right. Yeah. I mean, everyone's still going to get everything that they need. So that we have an imagination in which everybody can benefit, and all the people who are going to get what they, wanted before are still going to get it. But but people, just like you said, some people are afraid, and some people don't want to give up this level of power in a lot of ways. Yeah.
It's tough, okay, because I think I came from a system where I was tracked, and it's like, it's one of those, and to look and see like, well, who wasn't in the classes, right? Who who's being marginalized? What did the AP Calc class look like? What did the remedial math class look like? And just seeing like there's something wrong there, right? That was going on.
No, my high school, they put me, I was in the pre-engineering program, and they put me on the fifth, it's a 5 floor building, and they put me and the other people on the 5th floor. and everybody else is under that.
Yep.
Right. And then I didn't see any of these people literally until graduation. Right. And then I would go in and I would get on the escalator and go all the way past 4 floors to the 5th floor. And I didn't go anywhere else.
Wow.
Yes. Right. And so I benefited from that in so many ways, because we were obviously the special people and they treated us that way. And I was the valedictorian, and I stood up in front of all these people giving a speech, and I knew, very few of those people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they didn't know me. They probably was like, who is this?
Who's that guy?
Who's the valedictorian? I never met him. Yeah.
So, I mean, and that does take some confrontation of our own stories with mathematics too. And like, think about just because we have stories that are the stories that we just shared, doesn't mean we can't change a story, right? Change stories going forward. So
correct. No, my story is not a success story. Let's just be clear about it. Because I think, again, this is why we have to go back and do narrative. And you did it, right? You said who was not there.
Yeah.
And I know I can name, when I've gone back and interrogated my own story, right? I can now name 15 people who was just as smart as me. Right. Who were not treated as well as me. And then I got all these opportunities, right? Because I got into certain things that these people did not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so like having those interrogations of your own story and having the perspective, and then, and sharing the stories that's in radical equations, like people like, oh, whoa, like I never thought about math like this. And so if it is a gate and I got through the gate, well, who didn't get through the gate? I mean, that's
absolutely
a simple question.
Absolutely correct.
So what other learnings do you have from the book that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think also I would just hammer home the decision to say that, to call the system what it is. I mean, and just to say, look, here's what's happening, and speaking to power. Mm-hmm. And again, I come back to the fear part, to the conflict part, to say I'm going to talk to these people in power. And for what does that mean for us today? That means cussing out our dean, especially my tenure people. Like, if you can't lose your job, please take the time to critically, call some people out. Right? I mean, it's like, So I mean, so it's one of these things where when you're reading, it's like, on the page, it goes by so fast when you're reading. It's like, he did this, he did this. But it's like, if we actually took the time to sit down and really put ourselves in his shoes and think about some of these experiences, it would take us 3 years to read the book.
Yeah.
Right? Because he just goes and does this and this and this and this. And each one of these decisions for us and for anybody would just be super difficult to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why I'm saying, if I can just do 20%, right. And that just means calling into question some quote rules and so forth that we need to change. I mean, I'm going to a meeting after this, about college algebra, right? And we're going to look at DFW rates, and so I mean, I've had this fight before, and they're probably like, oh God, Aris is going to be here, so he's going to be loud again. But it's just like, I just have to say, look, part of the reason why these numbers are so high is because of us and what we do and what we assume to be the right way, right? And that, there's too much. Because I think also tied to this is that, when people struggle in algebra, we always want to blame children, right? And then it's just like,
what's up with these kids?
Right. Oh, that drives me crazy. And I am on a voyage to fight that every single time it's said. Like 10 years ago, I would just leave the room and just not be part of the conversation. And I'm moving to a place where I'm just going to be like, wait, hold up. So we have a choice. Are we going to blame children, or are we going to actually, talk about the unregulated power we have as teachers in the classroom? Right. And if you're trying to tell us, that they're not doing well in the space that we control, that just doesn't add up.
Yeah. Well, it just reminds me of, because when I first got into my doctoral work, I was doing a lot with inclusive ed. And so Wanda Blanchett. She wrote about the disproportionate representation of Black boys in special ed, and like talking about that. And it's like, and then, you know, you have then IDEA came out with a revamp there. And it was like, you know what, how about teachers? We got to look back at ourselves. It's not like everything is not about students, especially if we're talking about this overrepresentation. Like, you know, there's a cultural difference here. Like, so how do we like actually look at what you're doing as a teacher? And are you actually teaching in a way that that speaks to your students, and thinking about, you know, are you taking into account like who's in the classroom and how can you best reach them, and again, uncover their brilliance versus thinking like, well, they're not doing it the way I want them to do it, so thus there must be something wrong. And like,
absolutely right. And so what you just said there really hits home for me, because, you know, when people are put wherever, it's often because other people have made decisions. And then we just have to ask, well, what are these decisions based on? Right. And how are these decisions being made? Right. And so, you know, and that's where the hard conversations come from, because then people start to act like, oh, are you trying to say I did something bad? Are you saying I'm a bad person? Are you saying, right? And this is why we have to reframe racism and racist structures as being independent sometimes of the people who are participating in the structures themselves.
Right.
To say that, look, you know, there are decisions being made according to rules that do not favor certain groups of people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it was like, there's a book, Kendi's book. I mean, like when he talks, it's almost like mathematical, like definitions of when you see racism and like, so, okay, so if you're not doing anything, you're going with the flow, and there's racist policies and
correct
that are happening. Well, then you're participating in them. So passively, you know, you're like, oh, I'm not racist. Well, no, you're still going with the flow here. And so how do we push against those things? And so, the conversations you're about to have, and like, and that's, I put it on my own self, like being able to connect with our math department here. Cause I know there's things that they could be doing, because stuff that Bob Moses is talking about, where kids are coming in and taking remedial classes and not being able to count those towards their graduation requirements. And now they're already starting in a hole, both economically and academically. And so now, okay, again, you see that gate.
Yes.
And so what can we do as an institution to rectify that? And so, how do we push against it?
Yeah, the thing we've done in Georgia, following Tennessee and following California, is that we've done this whole co-rec model now. Right. For this very reason, that, and I don't know, and I'm sure it's beneficial to the powers that be as well, but I also believe that a number of the correct people started to complain that this was not working, right? That somehow the remedial space was not one that was helping out anybody. It was the math ghetto. Yeah. Again, I'm just being real. Like, you just get put in there and it is hard to get out. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So like, I mean, again, he did 1,000 things, but we can see like, ooh, that's a place of influence I can work on. Well, talk about relationships with mathematics and how do we talk about that versus, talking about literacy, but then also just, like there's a higher ed like point there where when kids are going into, middle school or exit middle school, that they're on a college level track, that's a floor. I mean, that's still a good target to go for, not just to put kids into classes that have the name algebra somewhere hidden within it, but it's actually a legitimate like math course that's ending towards some sort of outcome that's desirable for a student to have. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I know I want to honor your time because I know you got good meetings coming up. So how has this book influenced what you do in the classroom?
Oh, yes. I mean, I just see people. Yes, it is tied to seeing people. And so I spend a lot more time learning about people's experiences. And if there is nothing that anybody gets from what I've said during this time, hear this. It is, trust me, that the experience, whatever you're trying to get mathematically, will be improved if you get to know the lives of your students. I mean, and take the time. So on the first day, and I'm trying to make this more periodic, But the first day, we don't do any math at all. We just don't do it. And then I hear all the people, you know, in the way that I've been raised as a mathematician say, but wait, you don't have enough time, content, blah, blah, right? Like, yeah, you're going to run out of, you won't be able to cover, you know, inverse trig substitution, right? But it's like, yeah.
Important stuff. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But just to really understand the people that you're connecting with. Because what I found is that when I do that, it completely changes the way that I teach. Right. And all the examples, and, you know, I'll be talking and be like, oh, Mike, remember when you said on the first day that, right? It's just like, yeah. So, I mean, so it's that. And then I advocate. I just advocate for students, marginalized students across the board. I was always advocating for some students, right? But now I advocate, you know, across the board. So it extends beyond the classroom because I'm teaching. And then within the classroom, I've also decided to call out the very system that we're talking about to say. And so that's particularly true every time we have a test. I just say, look, we're having this test as part of a system. We should not be doing this. But yeah, so really just saying that, you know, being very explicit about the system that we're in and how it's not okay. And that, you know, that I'm trying to do my best to fight against it. I just let them know that. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's ridiculous. Yeah. What we've normalized about saying, here, take this test, let me put a number on it, and this is what you're worth. Right. That's not okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then again, a lack of imagination and courage to say, what could we do differently here? Yeah. What is this? How can we do assessment differently? Yeah. And there's some incredible, brilliant people who are working on that. Mm-hmm. Right. And we need to elevate that and scream that out to the world. Yeah. And it just made me think back to some of the stuff, like, you know, he's constantly talking about the relationships that he was building in the places he was in. And because you can't just say, well, you need to go do this work. Well, you have to have the relationship, right? You have to sit with them and, you know, sit on and share a moment, either, you know, through a meal or whatever, like having those sorts of things and builds. And I always make the connection to conduits, right? You're building conduits. Like when you're on that first day of class, it's like you're building conduits in order to develop that relationship between you and that person. So then when math content is ready to be taught, you're trying to facilitate you know how they operate, and you can provide those experiences and things that are going to facilitate their relationship with mathematics. And without it, like, you know, you're just throwing stuff up and it's like, well, how do I even know if it's making the connection? Right. And so, you know, this is a human endeavor, right? We need to put, you know, humans first. And like, I think that is where, you know, thinking about what the work that he did is always about the people first, and like what is going to facilitate people gaining access to either, you know, citizenship over and over again. Like you think about civil rights and being able to, you know, operate within the world. And then also for me, I mean, too, that explicit connection between like, how am I communicating with my students, and how am I communicating for them to communicate with their students, and like, how are they uncovering the brilliance within their student? Like, are they allowing multiple means of expression of things so that they, you know, it's not just, well, I've got one way to do it. I've got one opportunity for students to show their ways of understanding a concept. And so, you know, like you say, like there's some constraints that we have, like, oh, where's the paper and pencil test that shows us? No, I've seen evidence of this kid be showing this understanding. And that's legit, you know, and that's super legit. And so like trying to, you know, how do we push against some of those accepted classroom practices? And like, cause he's always pushing. And so how do we keep pushing? Absolutely. As well? Yeah. And then the final frontier for me is that, you know, we said that he was committed, it was part of his life mission, but that is tied to the fact that he was a Black man in America. Mm-hmm. And for me, the last frontier is, how is it that in a lot of ways that we can get more Joe Amadons in the world, right? In the sense that, how is it that we can get, frankly, you know, when 80% of the teachers are white people, right? How is it that in a country that has this racial history, to be able to authentically look at people of color and say that that child is just as valuable as every other child. Mm-hmm. And I mean that authentically, and we are nowhere near that. And it is because we aren't having the hard conversations. that we politicize treating every child, with value. And the aim to do that, we've treated that as political. And so for me, I've gotten to a place where, regardless of pedagogy, I'm past pedagogy. There's all sorts of great pedagogies. The last frontier is how can we get people to confront white supremacy, misogyny, patriarchy as teachers every single day, right? Because you can have all the pedagogy you want, but again, if you don't look at Jamal and Tommy the same way,
right?
If you we won't be able to do that. But if you can't say, I know that within me are things that will put Jamal on a lower tier than Tommy, if we can't say that,
right,
then I don't care how you're teaching, right? And so here that, for Bob Moses and for others, they are fighting for their lives, right? They're fighting for the lives of their future generations.
Right.
We as teachers, regardless of race and identity, must be on the voyage of looking at our kids as one of us, regardless of this, right? And so having these conversations ahead of time where you hear the struggle, where you get an inkling of what it means to be a girl in mathematics, a Black boy in this world, right? And the understanding that and being educated to understand that when a Black boy says that, oh, I don't have this, it is not because of deficiencies, it is because of the United States of America, right? And how we can fight against that, at least in the hour and 15 minutes we have that person in our classroom.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Confront, recognize it, confront it, fight against
it. Right? Yes. Yeah. Because there's just too much, let me teach everybody the same way. There's too much, let me subscribe to this formula of teaching. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being willing to join me and talk about this amazing book. I do want to, I know we have just a couple minutes left. I want to honor your time, but I do want to talk about Mathematically Uncensored. Tell me what's going on with that podcast and the couple books you got going on.
Yes, it's a lot of the same of what you just heard from me, and just multiply it by 3.5 with the incredible Pamela Harris. She is just out of control, amazing. And so what we're trying to do is, again, speak the truth about the experiences of people of color in the mathematical sciences and higher ed. A lot of the times we do talk about some K through 12 subjects as well, because I'm connected to that space in a lot of ways. And so, so if you go to minoritymath.org, which is the place where is the Center for Minorities in the Mathematical Sciences. We do a podcast for that. And so if you go into publicity, you'll find Mathematically Uncensored. You'll find it in all the podcasts places as well. And so, we've just talked about, we're fighting every episode, right? And so we're trying to do both, center a space for people of color in the mathematical sciences, but also to just fight against the structures that keep telling us that we don't belong. Right. And then the book is tied to that. The books are kind of tied to that. So the first book was about advocating for students of color in mathematics. Right. So the first one's called Asked and Answered. And so that's done really well. And so we're excited about continuing to fight. That book comes out of a 4-part series that Pamela and I did, in which we were, and that was the title of the series, Advocating for Students of Color, which we went through a bunch of scenarios of how we would, fight against these structures. And so the book is centered around that. And then that came out December of last year. And now the one that we got coming out next week, which is going to be the beginning, the second week of August, is going to be from people who have been doing stuff in the discipline and really just centering their voices. So we got 20 contributors who are just saying, here's what we did, here's why we did it, here was the impact, and here's why we're going to keep doing it.
Nice. Action.
Yeah. So, the work is, so in the spirit of Bob Moses, I'm just trying to keep pushing, just keep pushing. Yeah. Try
to get that 20%, but we'll put links to everything in the show notes. So if people are looking for that stuff, but I I want to say thank you. Thank you for spending some time with me. I say it over and over again, but part of the pleasure of this podcast is being able to organize hour-long conversations with folks. So
yes,
mission accomplished there.
Whatever excuse we can get to talk, I'll take it.
But yeah, and so we just wanted to celebrate the life and work of Bob Moses and to keep it going.
That's right. And in the spirit of Bob Moses, we have to keep it going. Right. Joe, you're an inspiration. I appreciate the time.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. It was good. It's good. My reading this morning, the highlight was on the word good. And what does it mean to be good? And Bob Moses was good. And hopefully you heard that in our conversation, Aris and I's conversation. You heard about the good work that he did. And good in as truest of the word that can be. He did good work. And the thing is, his work is not done. And what he did was invest in the lives of others so that they could do good work as well. And like Aris says, like, there's no way we're going to match him, but if we could just do 20%, man, think about how this world would be. And so let's start doing that. Let's start using his life as an example and keep striving to do good work, just like Bob Moses. So, but that is all I have for this episode of the Amidon Planet podcast. Show notes for the podcast can be found at amidonplanet.com/episode 50. Lots of great links there, especially links to Aris and Pamela's podcast, Mathematically Uncensored. Take a look at that and all the other links that we mentioned in this episode. And if you're looking for ways to support the podcast for the next 50 episodes, you can subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. You can subscribe to the Amidon Planet download, which contains teaching resources and updates from Amidon Planet. We'll get that kicked back into gear once we get to the school year. Taking a little break, man. We're trying to breathe a little bit. You can also follow at Amidon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or like the Amidon Planet Facebook page. You can also check out the Amidon Planet store, Amidon Planet Bookshop. Links can be found in the footer at amidonplanet.com, where all of your purchases support the production costs of the podcast. So you are a sponsor. You wearing that Be the Good shirt, you can say, I'm a sponsor of the Amidon Planet podcast. So thank you. Thank you very much. And also, thank you for the time of Aris, for being willing to spend some time talking about Bob Moses and his life and legacy and talking about his fantastic book, Radical Equations. Thank you to all of you out there for listening. And thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there who are seeking to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because of people like Bob Moses, but also because of people like you have decided to use the gifts you've been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.